Okay, so I thought we'd do a brief history of each railroad from 1950 and just kind of look at it and see what and see what's happened over the time. So first one alphabetically is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look in a little bit more detail at the components that were there in 1950. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe.
Okay, now we're going to go over some locomotives on the West End in the 1990s, just to see what's happened to the Santa Fe. First of all, as we said, the Santa Fe came into Santa Fe. Well, later on, they built south of it. The terrain was better to build south of it, some 10, 15, 20 miles, whatever. And then they had Santa Fe Junction, and then here's Santa Fe. And it was originally a Santa Fe branch, and then later a number of different railroads took it over. And in the 90s, it was Santa Fe Southern. And they ran from Santa Fe to Santa Fe Junction. They had a passenger train, ran several times a day, and connected with the Amtrak Southwest Limited, and they hauled some freight as well into Santa Fe. Well, meanwhile, now we're going to go west from Belene. They go through Abo Canyon, which was a difficult terrain, and they have since the grades weren't too bad, but the terrain was difficult. And then they've since double tracked that through Gallup, Flagstaff, Williams, and across northern New Mexico, northern Arizona. And as you'll see, it's pretty good terrain for building a railroad. It was relatively flat in many areas. And the other thing that happened in the 90s is that the Santa Fe resurrected the red and silver war bonnet paint scheme. And it was very, very successful. And so the trains often look like this with 4 red war bonnet units. Initially, they were GP60s, 4-axle units. And then they went to B40-8s. That's the General Electric version. And then they started buying the CCs, because they wanted to be able to use these elsewhere on other, and the trains were getting heavier. The container trains were getting heavier, and they're getting longer, and they needed extra tractive effort. So these are 4,000 horse -840CWs for W for wide cab. And here we're in northern Arizona, and it's still relatively decent terrain. There are a few areas that were a little bit more difficult, but nothing like Glorieta and Cajon Pass. So the trains are moving along pretty good. Here we're in northern Arizona, and a train pulling through with an SD75 in the silver paint scheme, and it looks like a GP60 back there on a container train. Now we're coming into California through Needles here, and then towards Barstow. Here's across the Mojave Desert, which is this area here. This stretch here is across the Mojave Desert. And you can see it's very dry, pretty flat. And I mean, it used to be a sea, an ocean. And so it's quite flat. And they just built right along. And then the trains run right along, pretty good speed here. As we see, we're seeing more of the SPSF red units. Now this is 1990, so it's some years after the ICC had denied the merger of the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific, but of course they painted a lot of units, and so there were a lot of units, as you will see, running around in the 1990s. This is in Eastern California. Of course, they mine gypsum and a lot of other things, and they have cement plants and all sorts of things. But here's a freight train coming through with 6 BB units, GP 38s, 30s, 20s, all sorts of different things. And now we're in California. Here's one of the Santa Fe Spanish influenced depot. Amtrak was stopping, and this is on the way up to Barstow. And this is the Amtrak Desert Wind that went from from Los Angeles Union Station to Las Vegas, and it was quite successful. And then it was taken off, and I understand they may be putting it back on, maybe even talking about a high-speed train. There's a lot of traffic. So here is Barstow. This was Santa Fe built this as a large yard. There's a hump yard, diesel facility, car shop, the whole works. And so here we are at this is their main diesel shop, large shop for doing light and heavy maintenance. And again, we see more red units. These, I think, are U-36Cs, and they're probably delivered in the red and yellow, so they haven't painted them yet. Here's a couple of F-45s and a B-40 -8 that are being switched around in the engine terminal. Here's some more units getting ready to run a train, and more red. So we talked about the F units, and the Santa Fe had bought many FTs, F3s, F7s, and later on they didn't need so many F units because they had replaced the mainline freight with larger units. Well, the Cleburne shops in Texas rebuilt F units into these sort of a GP9 type thing. And they were 1,500 horsepower, 567, which is very reliable. But they built frames, they built the cab, they built the hood, they put the fans up here. And you can see it's got the old half the radiator here, half the radiator there, 4 fans. And the 567, these Santa Fe ran these more than 15 years, doing industrial switching and branch lines and things like that. And then they sold them, and they sold very well. And many of them are still running around. They're 60, 70 years old, and they're still running around. You'll see them at elevators, in industrial parks, on short lines. Many of them bought them, and they just run and run and run. It was a good design, and Cleburne did a nice job on these things. So this is the CF7, and they build them from GP9s and GP7s, and also these 2 particular models are built from F units. As I mentioned, the Union Pacific comes down on the Los Angeles from Salt Lake. They have this line. That was a railroad, and the UP bought it from Salt Lake City. And they go Ogden, Salt Lake City, down to Las Vegas, and then to Yermo, California, which is about here, through Barstow, and then they're on trackage rights with the Santa Fe into Los Angeles. But that's basically the only line they have in Southern California. The only other line the UP had was one that came in through this way when they got the Western Pacific, and then of course later they took over the Southern Pacific. But at the time, that's again why the merger was not approved, because the only competition in California from large railroads would be this line and this line, and it wasn't that much. UP freight coming down off the Los Angeles and Salt Lake. The main line of the Santa Fe is here, and this line is coming into the Los Angeles and Salt Lake at Yermo, California, and near Yermo, California, and so it's got several SD40s. This is in the 1990s, and they're pulling this line. This train is going to Los Angeles. And now, Byron, you'd asked about the section that was sort of not shown on the BNSF map. This is the line that the Santa Fe built right away. They got trackage rights over the Southern Pacific through Tehachapi Canyon, Tehachapi Pass, and I'll show some pictures in a minute, through Bakersfield. Then they built their own line on up to Stockton, up the San Joaquin Valley, to Sacramento, and then to Oakland. And so this train is coming down from Oakland and Stockton on this line, and it's coming into Barstow, north of Barstow. And you can see they're running 4 GP60s. That was very common in the early 90s, 4 GP60s on the trailer trains, because the trailer trains, they hadn't yet gone to these 2-mile long extravaganzas. They're still less than a mile long, and they were relatively light. So the GP60s work fine. Each one is 4,000 horse, so they had 16,000 horsepower. Now here's Tehachapi Loop. The track comes in and they actually loop. It loops over itself. So this train is actually going south. It came underneath itself. It looped around, and it's going around like this to make it up over the because it was sort of a box canyon. And so they had to run a lot of units because the grades are pretty good here. Southern Pacific ran a lot of trains, and so did the Santa Fe. Santa Fe runs on trackage rates. But they usually have 4 more units in the middle too. But you can see more red units. So here's this is an SD40-2, a SD45-2, an SD45, and a GP60, it looks like. So this one is coming around, lots of units on these trains because they needed the horsepower as the grades were stiff, and the curves take horsepower too because you're pulling the cars against that track. This is not a model. This is the Tehachapi Loop. Now he's going down and underneath himself through the little tunnel at the bottom. And here's one coming up, and he's heading up the hill behind us. And you can see they have 6 units on that. I mean, they did not spare the horsepower on these trains. Here's one climbing out of the valley. Lots of units. Now, next one we'll look at is from Barstow. So this is the stretch we've been looking at. Barstow to Bakersfield through the Tehachapi Loop, where it loops around itself. And then there's a big at Caliente, there's a big horseshoe curve and all sorts of interesting things through the mountains there. But now the Santa Fe also had to go for Barstow. They had to build down to Los Angeles. And so they built down to Los Angeles. And then, as I mentioned later, the Union Pacific came along. And of course, now it's a very critical line because the port in Long Beach gets many containers. And they have a lot of container trains. So this is the stretch we're looking at. And this is over Cajon Pass. It goes over the Sierra Nevada and then into the Los Angeles basin. So here's the double track line. You can see it's quite mountainous. And this one has SD40, SD45, and then an SD45-2. It's on looks like UPS trains. So it's a hot train. And this is going towards Los Angeles. Here's one somewhere up in there with a GP60, SD40, U30, a dash 840C, and then some SD40s. Here's on Cajon itself. Big curves. They've done a lot of work on it to improve the grades and the curves, mostly double track. And this is an SD45, an F45 in red, and this is a FP45 that was converted to freight service because they kept them when Amtrak came along. Now here's the Amtrak Desert Wind coming out of Los Angeles going towards Las Vegas. So you can see it's real mountain railroading there. One thing I was last time I was out there in the early 2000s, a colonel from the Army came up, and he's a rail fan. He was taking pictures, and I said, yeah, this is a great place, but he said you got to watch for snakes, but more importantly, he said watch for scorpions because the snakes will run away from you, the scorpions will chase you. And they're pretty nasty. So he said you have to be really careful. And I kind of went, ooh, this might not be as high on my list of places to rail fan anymore. And then in 1996, the merger happened. And so this is soon afterward. This is 1997. And already this is a C44 with a C40, the Santa Fe in back. And you can see this is the original paint scheme that they had. It was they tried several experimental paint schemes, but this is the first one that took. It was the Santa Fe symbol, if you recognize that, And sometimes it was blue with white lettering, like the Santa Fe was. And then they put Burlington Northern a Railway around the outside, and that was the symbol. So it was BNSF. Don't try to get fancy. So they honor both railroads and the employees of both railroads. And then they used the original Great Northern scheme because, as I said, many people thought that was the most successful. And this was the first rendition, and then later they put the wider yellow stripes on it, and then they went to black and orange. So they went to orange and black instead of orange and dark green with a swoosh. So that's the Santa Fe.